两个专业
the
术语，一
flames.
个柴窑，一个气窑，能简单给我们介绍一下
So can you
什么
tell
叫
us
柴窑，什
the
么叫气窑？
difference
瓦斯的那
between
个
these two
炉去
kilns
烧
that
的
you。
那这
mentioned?
个就是那种
Well, this kiln is fired by gas, while this kiln is fired by
国内的
wood.
话一般是用那个松木，那你们是用柴烧是用什么木质呢？
So what kind of wood is used? I am not quite sure actually, because we do not actually own one of this wood-fired kiln. We actually have to go somewhere else to borrow their kiln for the firing of the porcelain ware. I am interested in the difference of the porcelain made by these two types of kilns. While for wood-fired kilns, they are of a higher temperature, and it is required to put in salt so that it will be more shiny, and it is more shinier than the gas-fired kiln, because the grease, the oil of the wood would also help glazing the porcelain ware. This is our first time here. We are here with our professors to be part of this activity, and we'll be here for about 3 to 4 days. Jingdezhen is known as the capital of China, has been here for more than 1,000 years. What are your feelings here? We visited many old kilns here at Jingdezhen. And gigantic porcelain vases. So it gives me a lot of inspiration. So hopefully when I come back, this inspiration would be turned into new works so that I can bring them here next time. Thank you. Now let's visit the next stall. At this market, as you can see, there are a lot of visitors, and it's reported that about 100,000 people visited this fair every day. So this fair has been held for 2 consecutive years, and it has become a great attraction at this time of the year. Now let's take a look at this stand. They are quite modern, very intricate designs. This is designed by an American artist. This is designer. So can you tell us your inspiration of these works? I find them quite intriguing. What's the story behind these works? They can be served as a chopstick stand. So the silkworm in China is pronounced as Chan, which is similar to the pronunciation of Zen. So this chopstick stand is made into the shape of a silkworm. And this is a very beautiful plate. Can you tell us more about it? This contains gold. This is also designed by this designer. Can you tell us the story behind it? Thank you so much. Now let's continue our tour of the fair. This is a stand of a Russian designer, a Russian potter. Sorry, I stand corrected. This is from Iraq. I guess this is inspired by its national culture. But over there is like a Buddha. But at this side, you can see that probably it draws inspiration from their local legend or religion. The designer is absent, so let's continue our journey to the next part. In this fair, it is a platform for people and artists to communicate with each other, but also an ideal location for people to talk business. This is the stand for a Russian designer. This is the very traditional Chinese blue and white porcelain, but the representation is different from the traditional Chinese patterns. This is more modern patterns and quite unique. I find your works quite interesting. It looks a bit like Chinese painting, but not exactly the same. Can you tell us more? This, for example, is a depiction of a road in the mountainous area. So the concept is that each person has its own path, and the path will differ from other people's paths. It's like a road leading to everyone's dream. I find this mug quite interesting because it has patterns of plants on the outside, and this is actually a set. So what does it mean, the pattern? What do they symbolize? I think, sorry, my Chinese is not so good. Probably I'll transfer to English. He's translating her words into Chinese. So, is the sale good? So how many people bought these products? Several people really liked my plates because they like the patterns of the mountains. I think I've sold 5 to 6 pieces. I hope that more people will find your work interesting. Now let's continue. As you can see, this is a porcelain painting. It uses high-temperature colored porcelain. And in Jingdezhen, the kiln can be fired up to the temperature of about 1,300 degrees Celsius, which would make it easier for us to color the porcelain. This has made full use of the high temperature kiln. And so for this kind of high temperature colored porcelain, sometimes their colors and patterns will be uncertain because the paint will flow on its own in this very high temperature, and it's really hard to predict where the colors will flow to. For example, the color blue in this painting it's spreading with this very high temperature. So you have to know the colors quite well, and sometimes you have to try several times before the perfect pattern will show up. So so each time there might be a surprise if the product is finally out of the kiln. These are porcelain clocks, a work designed by a Hong Kong potter. I think this is painted on pattern instead of porcelain painting. And the porcelain has to go through special process without glazing. After this is fired, and we will have to paint on patterns on it. So this is a porcelain ware without glazing. These are very fine works. Very high quality, and if you feel it, it's not quite smooth on the surface. We talked a lot about glazing. Can you tell us more about the glazing techniques? Because when you look at the porcelain ware, you would see this glazing on it that's very similar to a coating. So a porcelain ware without glazing will be quite rough at the surface, and glazing is the process for us to smooth the surface of the porcelain ware. We have to first of all paint this pattern on this porcelain ware, and then to fire them in this very high temperature kilns in order for the color to stabilize. But the plates that we have just seen is not glazed. So if you touch it, you can feel very rough texture on it, almost like the surface of stones. These are quite raw texture of the mud and clay. If it is glazed, it will be smoother. But this is quite a particular design by this potter. And this designer is actually doing some work here, using brushes and paints to paint on it. Usually we would use minerals as paint. That's another way of coloring these wares. Let's continue with our exploration. This is a stand of a Dutch designer. And these are all glazed work, and because you can see the reflections of lights, and if you touch it, it will be very smooth. Let's take a look at the bottom of this plate. The bottom is also glazed, but if you look at this corner here, this is not glazed. So if you touch it, it will not be so smooth as the other part of the plates. If you take a look at this mug, this side is not as smooth as the other side because it's not glazed. But at the side of the mug, it is very shiny and smooth. Let's see if we can talk to the designer. I find your work quite interesting because they have a childish innocence to them. Can you tell us the design of the concept?
There were millions of bicycles and no cars, and now there's just noise and cars and completely different country.
So
yeah.
you mean motor car? You mean motor car? Because
motor car. There were no motor cars when I came 24 years ago. Yeah, maybe one or two, but not millions like now. Yeah.
他的感觉是说完全不同的。他说这一次过来的话，感觉跟他可能跟他24年前相比，觉得现在更现代化，而且这边一些艺术就是制作工艺也更加的有了很大的提升。而且他觉得最重要一点就是可能环境更加安静了，因为他以前过来的时候可能觉得是说周围噪音太大，所以但是现在就觉得那些噪声大的一些交通工具全部都说被取缔了，所以营造了一个更好的环境。
那在景德镇的人们制作瓷器的方法或者说理念和他自己在那边介绍的，在他的国家介绍的制作陶器里面会有不同。
There are differences between the belief of making works between China, local Jingdezhen, and in your country.
That's a difficult question. Yeah, I think it's different because in Jingdezhen you have one person who does the throwing. They're only doing small pieces of work. They don't make one whole piece. Whereas I make here everything. I do everything. I do the glazing, I do the painting, the throwing, putting it together. In Jingdezhen you have one person to do the throwing, one person to do the painting. They just do one little piece of the job. That's the difference. Yes.
这个问题，但明显他一开始没有深想过这个问题，然后他给出我们那个答案是说，他觉得唯一点不同，最大的不同点在于，因为像在他的国家，像一件成品的出现是经过多人的通力合作，就负责拉坯的人专门负责拉坯，他不负责其他工艺。但是像在景德镇这一件成品，完全是由一个人完全由他负责呈现出来。然后他现在是说，也是借鉴了这边的一些经验，以及一些技术。他现在也是就是说，像更多的说像中国传统的技艺人一样，他就所有的作品都是他自己一个人说尽力完成的。
谢谢。
谢谢。
来，我们接着来逛这个有趣的。
Now let's continue with our tour.
学放。我了解到，就是这一次咱们陶器川的这个春秋大集应该已经。
As far as I know, this fair is the third so far this year, right? Yes. The spring fair happens on May, and the autumn fair happens on October. That is the one that we are visiting here right now. So there are exhibitors from 32 countries around the world showing their work here. Also, there are students from the major big art academies domestically. So this is a very great platform for this cultural communication and integration between China and other parts of the world, so that young people and artists around the world can communicate with each other. So this is a very good platform. You are also a porcelain expert. You must have seen a lot of works from foreign designers. So what are the similarities and differences between the work of foreign countries and China? I think differences do exist because the products that we made is in many cases related to Chinese culture, and the styles and colors and design of foreign products will be directly linked, will be more closely linked to their own tradition and culture. For example, the work by the Dutch artist that we have just seen, it shows this childhood innocence, and also it's quite distinct. So when people think of porcelain ware, they would think of like teapots or coasters or mugs. But we see more and more young potters here showing up their work. And the work that they do is quite different than what we are used to. because people would have a deep embedded concept in their mind about Jingdezhen. But Jingdezhen has been modernized, and more young artists would come here and showing their work, which has been reformed according to modern styles and tastes and designs. We need to keep the old tradition at the same time making innovations constantly so as to move the industry forward. You've been in this business for many years. So, what are the biggest changes in innovation of porcelain? I actually went to university here, and the senior students after graduation would come to Guangdong or other big output producer of porcelain. But right now, more and more people would choose to stay here because it provides us with a lot of opportunities, and there is a wider market acceptance for what we do, and it's now much easier for us to do some innovative works of our own. So porcelain ware are far more than just pots, teapots, and mugs, and coasters. Therefore, entrepreneurs here not only can support themselves, but also they have a very free environment to do innovation on their own. I believe this is the beginning for Jingdezhen to usher into a new era of development. We see artists and potters from all over the world, also some local designers here from China. This is a zone for some local designers. Most of them are students from big art academies of China. This used to be an old kiln of Jingdezhen, but with the renovation and reorganization of some of the porcelain manufacturers and big enterprises, there was this big laid-off wave, and most of these kilns and these workshops have been renovated. You can see this very big chimney that is still kept here. This is the chimney for the old kiln many years ago. These are some very old architecture. This used to be a porcelain factory. It has been renovated, but it's not torn down, and it's been newly renovated. We keep most of the structure and the chimney as well. This is an old factory, and if you look at these tiles here, you might feel nostalgic because this is the structure of the 90s. It almost looked like the tile style that we found in the architecture of the 1950s. Even after renovation, we still tried our best to keep the old look of these traditional architecture. So how does this factory got deserted and then renovated again into this market? This used to be a porcelain factory, and after it was deserted, it was renovated now into a comprehensive project. Besides the porcelain fair, there are also shops and some cafe and bars and hotels. So it has become a very hot spot for young people. Most of the shops and designs you hear is quite modern. I've come to Jingdezhen for many times in the past 2 years. In the past, when you think about Jingdezhen, you regard it as an old porcelain capital. But in recent years, a lot of makers, a lot of designers, young designers would come here. And I also talked to a lot of the makers here. A large portion of them are not local, actually me included. I come from Shijiazhuang of Hebei province, but after I came here, I chose to stay here because I really fell in love with the art of porcelain, and that's why a lot of young people like me would choose to stay here to start their own business and to do their own designs. So what would you tell to the visitors who have never been here? What are the qualities and characteristics of this place that attract so many young people to come here and stay here? I believe, first of all, its cultural heritage. This cultural tradition is what's central to Jingdezhen as a porcelain capital of China. And second, when you are trying to start a business here, you will feel very welcomed and accepted here. So that's another important reason why people choose to come and stay here. There are a lot of young people who migrate to Jingdezhen to start their business. Most of the products have very novel designs compared to what we're used to, and they would have a better aesthetic value than the porcelain ware that we use at home. There's also quite a big room for maneuver here because there is a very big market acceptance here. Here you can see this very small piece as an ornament. This is actually a brooch, and this is made into the shape of different animals, cats and deers. This is the chopstick stand. So this is much more than its functions, its actual functions, but the designers attaches more aesthetic values to it. So you will most likely find people of similar taste with you here. There are all sorts of styles and designs. This is a new style of the blue and white porcelain. As you can see, the patterns are quite different from the traditional blue and white porcelain. So how do we color these porcelain wares? The blue and white porcelain is colored by brushes which is dipped into a particular kind of paints. It's almost like painting on canvases, or rice papers, but will feel a little bit different. And after it is colored, it will be put into kilns so as to stabilize the color.
在这里可以给大家看一下这个帐篷上面写的这一条街，就是国内外的一些比较知名的艺术院校，他们的学生在。
On the street, you can see some of the works of the students of art academies in China. So beside the spring and autumn fairs, on each weekends we would also have fairs of porcelain wares. Dear viewers, I'm with CCTV. I'm right now at Taoxichuan of Jingdezhen of Jiangxi province. That's all for today's live stream. Thank you for watching.